Hello and welcome to Hotseat, an exciting collaboration between Sky News and First News, the UK's national newspaper for young people. This time we've taken the show on the road to the Science Museum, appropriately enough because we've got an actual astronaut here. But Charles Boden isn't just any Major Tom, Dick or Harry. President Obama asked him to head up NASA. He's in charge of America's entire space program. This is who's going to be asking the questions, the Hotseat panel. They've been drawn from First News readers and schools across the country. Now, before they get stuck in, Mr. Boden, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Thank you for coming here. Who are you and why are you so important?
Well, thank you very much. I'm not very important, but my name is Charles Boden, or Charlie Boden, as everybody calls me. I am what's called the NASA Administrator, or the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, headquartered in Washington, D.C., and it's an organization of about 18,000 people around the world. And in America, we have 9 NASA field centers that do all of our work.
Right, so let's get the Inquisition on. Omid, you've got a question.
What were you in charge of during the 4 missions into space?
Oh, when I flew my 4 space shuttle missions, and I'm a space shuttle astronaut, so you know, I tell kids there are 2 generations of astronauts today. There are those who flew nothing but the space shuttle like me, a long mission, like my longest mission was 9 days. Today, astronauts live and work in space for 6 months at a time. So I flew as a pilot. On my first 2 missions, I was the co-pilot. The title was pilot, but I was the co-pilot. And then my last 2 missions, I was the mission commander, which meant I was responsible for the safety of the crew, for getting the crew trained, and then the fun part was actually landing the shuttle when we came back to Earth.
I mean, that's you there on the screen. What's happening here?
That's me on the screen, and one of my, if I could see the patch, that's probably the Hubble Space Telescope mission. And if so, on that mission, I was actually, oh no, that's my last flight. So I was a commander there. This is Ken Reitler, who was my assistant, or my co-pilot.
Great. Omid, thank you very much for that question. The next question is from Edward. Edward, what do you want to ask?
How do you pass time when you're in space?
Oh, Edward, there's no question about passing time. It's how do you find time to do things that are fun that you might like to do. Our flight schedule is in what's called a flight plan. It's done every day and it's in 15-minute increments. And so the schedule is filled up with things that you have to do boom, 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 right behind the other. You're scheduled to sleep, you're scheduled to eat, you're scheduled to exercise, you're even scheduled to float into the window with a camera and take pictures. So you had to work with your mission planners to make sure that they gave you some time, generally the 2 times that you got to relax and have a good time, well, 3 times. When you ate, when you exercised, and when you did what we call Earth observations, where you could float into the window, look out and take pictures.
Edward, thank you very much. Grace, it's your question next.
Have you had any technical difficulties while up in space, and have you ever been scared?
Grace, we actually on my very, very, very first flight, we had technical difficulty that turned out to not be as bad as it seemed at first. Immediately on liftoff, you know, you lay on your back in a spacecraft, whether it's the space shuttle or Soyuz or soon an Orion that we're going to be flying to go to Mars. You're on your back for about 2 to 3 hours while the ground team processes the vehicle, make sure everything's okay. And on my very first flight aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia, when we finally got through the countdown and lifted off, we were surprised for one thing because we had been in the vehicle 4 previous times and had not gone. We had canceled for one reason or another, mechanical problems, weather, or whatever. As soon as we lifted off, within seconds, we heard the bump, 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 an alarm went off, and I looked down at my console and it said we had a leak of helium from one of our 3 main engines. That's really, really, really a bad day because helium provides pressure for all the seals and everything that keeps the main engine together. If you actually have a helium failure and all of it leaks out, the engine's going to blow up and you're not going to live. So we knew that. I have an emergency procedure that I had trained on, and you know, so I was very comfortable with it. And I told the ground and my crew that I was going to start working the emergency procedure. We got about halfway through and we looked at our display and we saw something really funny that said we were making helium. That's impossible. And so we called the ground again and said, we think we have a data problem. It's not a problem with the engine at all. We just think we're getting bad data, so we're going to undo all the corrective action we did and just go back to normal ops. And we did, and turned out after the flight, when they evaluated everything, we had just a little piece of debris that got on one of the little, computer components, and it given us the bad indication temporarily.
I mean, that sounds scary, but you also flew combat missions.
I did.
in Vietnam.
I did.
How did those two types of fear compare?
I think I never felt fear flying in space like you did on a combat mission when people were shooting at you. It's a little different.
Yeah, you don't get Martians shooting you.
You don't
in
have any
space.
Martians shooting at you or anything else. So.
Thanks
Okay.
very much for that question. Next question, Clara at the end there. What would you like to ask?
What's NASA's most significant project and why?
Oh, what's NASA's most significant project today? I have to divide it into the major mission areas that we have. If you're talking about aeronautics, the one that's most challenging to us right now is trying to help America's Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, the regulating body in the United States, put the right systems on board autonomous vehicles, drones, so that we can integrate them into our national air transportation system, so that people like Google and Amazon and other people can fly unmanned aerial systems into our airspace like normal airplanes. That's NASA's big challenge there. When you talk about science, no question, it's getting the James Webb Space Telescope ready for its launch in 2018. James Webb is a massive telescope that's going to launch on a European spacecraft, on a European launch vehicle out of Kourou in South America, and it's going to be like 1.6 million kilometers away from Earth. And it's going to study planets and other solar systems. It's actually going to help us to look into the atmosphere of some of the new planets that we've been discovering that look like Earth, to see if maybe there are signs of life there and other kinds of things. If you come back to human space flight, in addition to working on the International Space Station, our big goal right now is to get humans ready to go to Mars in the 2030s. So some of you may have an opportunity to do that.
Okay, guys, ready for Mars. And we've got some questions about Mars,
Yeah.
but next question is from Oliver here. Oliver, what do you want to ask?
Did going to space change you in any way?
Oliver, I get asked a lot of times, did it change me? And I would say I wasn't changed by going into space. My perspective on our planet, on Earth, changed significantly for a number of reasons. Looking at Earth from the vantage point of space is the most absolutely breathtaking experience I had ever had. I'd been in airplanes a lot, like you said, flying around, flying combat, flying other things. Earth is beautiful from that perspective, but from the vantage point of Earth, where you can see, almost the whole ball at one time, you can see the vast expanse of space. Sunrises and sunsets happen, boom, in an instant. Whereas down here on Earth, the sun rises very slowly, sets very slowly. It happens in seconds in space, and it's just breathtaking. And I became much more appreciative of this planet on which we live. I became much more aware of the fact that as human beings, we don't get along the way that we should because of whether they're racial differences or national differences or sometimes very trivial differences. And I came back intensely interested in trying to make the world a better place, a more peaceful place.
Great. Oliver, thank you for that question. So next up is Carmen.
Do you believe in aliens, and can you tell us about Area 51?
Yeah, Carmen, there is an Area 51. It is not what many people think that I know of. I've been to the place that's called that, but it's a normal research and development place. I never saw any aliens or alien spacecraft or anything when I was there. I think because of the secrecy of the aeronautics research that goes on there, it's ripe for people to talk about aliens being there. In terms of, I don't use the term alien, I use other life. I do believe that we will someday find other forms of life or a form of life if not in our solar system, in some of the other solar systems, some of the other billions of solar systems in the universe. Now we know things that 10 years ago we didn't know. 10 years ago we hadn't identified the more than 2,000 planets that are orbiting other suns and other galaxies. Today we know that there are literally thousands, if not millions, of other planets, many of which may be very similar to our own Earth, And so some of us, many of us, believe that what we're going to find one of these days is evidence that there is life elsewhere in the universe.
So no aliens in Area 51, but of course you would say that. You would say that. Yeah. Carmen, thanks for that question. Next up is Shania. Shania.
How soon do you think you'll get the first man or woman on Mars?
Oh, we have orbiters and landers on Mars now, and we've had them there for 40 years. The United States has, almost from the very beginning of the human spaceflight program, the United States, and now working with our international partners, we're focused on sending what we call precursors to Mars and to other planets in the solar system to learn as much about them for two reasons. One is to help us understand that planet as a place that we may one day want to send humans. And we know we want humans to go to Mars, so we're trying to learn as much about it as we can. But the other reason we send satellites and orbiters and landers to these places is because every time we learn something about another planet in our solar system, every time we learn something about one of its moons, every time we learn something about asteroids and comets, like, you know, Comet 67P, I can't even pronounce the name, that the European Philae lander landed on last year. Every time we learn things about those bodies in the universe, we learn more about our own Earth, and that's what's really, really, really important.
Well, what's the date though?
Oh, when are we going to put humans there? My guess is our goal is to have humans on Mars in the 2030s. So that means the first humans will go to Mars hopefully in the early 2030s. They won't land. They'll go and they'll probably do an orbital mission like the first time we went to the moon. We may put some orbiting one of the moons of Mars. And we may even decide on a second or subsequent mission that we're ready to land somebody on one of Mars's moons and let them do some telerobotic operations, because we've got to get the Martian surface ready for human habitation. We're not going to send astronauts down to the surface of Mars to build the habitats, for example, the houses where astronauts are going to live. We're probably going to use robots, and you're going to help develop some of those. So we'll either be in Mars orbit, we'll be back here on Earth, or we may be on a moon of Mars doing all the telerobotic operations, running the robots that are building the habitats, probably burrowed into the Martian surface, so we get protection from the Martian soil from the radiation environment out there.
Just to pick up on that idea that we'll be doing it from a distance, what do you make of the notion that we could send a one-way mission to Mars, the Mars One idea? What do you make of that?
I'm not a fan of a one-way mission to Mars, and the biggest reason I'm not is because today we don't know enough to be able to sustain life on Mars. Our technical capability is not as good as we want it to be now. Because we're Americans, we could be much more demanding. We need better life support systems. We need a toilet that's not going to break on the way there, and then when we get on the Martian surface, it's going to work over and over and over. We need water recycling equipment just like you have here in London, so that when we need water, we can take urine, we can take perspiration, we can take any liquid, put it into the water recycling apparatus and get fresh drinking water out. We've got to learn how to grow plants, vegetables. We've got to learn how to use microbes. When you talked about aliens, Carmen, I really think that the microbes that we discover on these other planets, we are going to learn how to use those microbes to make food. Whether it's stuff like steak or vegetables, it'll make concrete. There are all kinds of things that we now know we're seeing in laboratories that we can do. We know so much more today than we knew 10 years ago. So 2030s, to answer your question.
I didn't realize it was toilets keeping us from the red planet, but there we go.
Toilets are a big deal.
Our next question is from Rosie at the end there. Rosie.
It looks like you are good at everything. So what are you rubbish at?
What am I?
What are you bad at?
Oh, what am I bad at? Oh, Rosie, I am so bad at so many things. I do not speak foreign languages. I knew a little German once. I studied Latin in school, and I knew a little Latin, but I've forgotten all my foreign languages. I'm horrible at it. That's not good for a person who's the administrator, the head of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration that has more than 700 partnerships with more than 120 nations. It would be so impressive if I could walk into Paris and address my counterpart in French, or go to Africa and address my counterpart in one of the African nations in Swahili or whatever the language of that country happened to be, and I don't do that very well. I love athletics. I'm not a very good athlete. I love music. I don't sing very well, but I love to try all the time. And I'm a mediocre kind of a student, but I study all the time and I try to learn. So there's a lot that I'm rubbish at, but I would say to all of you, just because you're rubbish at something doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do that, and that you should never tell yourself that you can't do something. You know, say, okay, I know I'm rubbish at this, but I'm going to keep working at it until I become the best in the world. Even the things that I'm rubbish at, I try all the time. I'm a lousy golfer, but I play golf as much as I can because one of these days I may learn how to hit the ball. Yeah.
Very optimistic. We won't ask you for a rendition of a tune at this point. So that was the first round. We're going to come back now to Ahmed. Ahmed, your second question.
Is NASA doing anything to reduce the impact of aviation pollution on the environment?
Oh, NASA is doing an incredible amount. For example, we're working with the Federal Aviation Administration, not only in the United States. We ran a test at the Armstrong Flight Research Center out in California last year. We had representatives from France, from Canada. I think there were some airplanes from the UK, and we used American airplanes. We had a big DC-8 that we could load 4 different kinds of fuels on, and we were testing biofuels, fuels that are made not from carbon products. And then we had a Canadian airplane, a French airplane, American airplanes that came in and flew formation behind the exhaust on that airplane as we changed the fuels. They had very sophisticated sensors looking at the levels of pollution coming out of the engine as we changed to different fuels. We're looking at noise pollution. We had a project that's called Low Boom, where we're trying to enable the Federal Aviation Administration to set standards that will allow us to fly supersonic over the ground. It's illegal right now in the United States, but we think you can design an airfoil, an airplane, such that when you boom, when you get a sonic boom, it doesn't go down and break windows, it kind of goes up into the atmosphere. So a lot of things to try to increase the fuel efficiency in airplanes, decrease the noise, whether it's on the helicopter rotors or an engine, decrease the pollution, and make it much more comfortable inside the airplane. If you go on a Boeing 787, it's a really strong airplane. The outside of it is made of composite material, it's not metal, and NASA was a very big partner with Boeing in the design and construction of that airplane.
That's cool. So next time you're on a Dreamliner, I think it's called, that's NASA technology.
A Dreamliner, or even an Airbus, because if you look at the wings, the very tip of the wing, the winglets, that's a NASA invention, and it increases the fuel efficiency, decreases the amount of air circulation and turbulence coming out.
Thanks very much for the question, Ahmed. Edward, your second question. What do you want to ask?
If you could bring any 3 people to space, who would you bring and why?
Oh, any 3 people? My 3 granddaughters. I'd take them with me so they could experience what I've experienced in space. I'd do it in a heartbeat.
That's great. No hesitation. I really like that. Thanks, Edward. That was a great question. Grace, your second question.
Do you get annoyed when people say that the moon landing was fake?
No, I don't get annoyed at all. I mean, I understand people have legitimate doubts and concerns. I just happen to know what I did when I flew in space. I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to go to the moon. When I came into the space program, into the space shuttle program in 1980, at that time, I really thought I'd fly a few flights in the space shuttle, then go back to the moon, get to land on the moon, and I would actually go to Mars. That's the way we were progressing at the time. And then we had the Challenger accident, which really set us back. But I have no doubts that we went to the moon, and I have no doubt that we're going to Mars in your lifetime.
Great. Thanks very much, Grace. Clara, your second question.
What arguments do you use to convince Congress that space exploration is a worthwhile use of money?
Oh, Clara. What arguments do I use with the U.S. Congress? My friend David Parker, who's the head of the UK Space Agency here, I talk to all my fellow heads of space agencies, and we compare notes every once in a while. You know, he talks about how he approaches the Parliament. We try to tell them the benefits that come from space exploration, not just that people can go, but that when you look at the constellation of almost 100 satellites that are orbiting our Earth today, just looking at Earth, looking at the planets, looking deep into the universe, particularly those that are looking at our Earth, helping us understand climate change, helping us understand what kinds of things can we do to decrease the effect of climate change on Earth. Can we predict bad weather much sooner? Can we tell people one of these days when a volcano is going to erupt, or when we're going to have an earthquake, so that people can evacuate areas or not build in an area that's prone to earthquakes or maybe a volcano and things like that.
Clara, what do you think's the biggest benefit of space travel?
More knowledge about space, everything like that.
And you're absolutely right. As I said before, why do we study other planets and asteroids and comets? Because every time we learn something that we didn't know about that particular part of our solar system or of our universe, we learn more about our own Earth. Because in the beginning, we believe, whether you believe in the Big Bang or what, we believe that all of this started, from some common source. And when you find a comet and you study the water that's in that comet, hopefully it has some commonality with water on Earth. We had a shock from Philae that the European Space Agency will probably start talking about. If you haven't seen it already on UK news, Philae found that the water on the Comet 67P, it's not like our water here on Earth. It's heavy water. So the hydrogen in the water on the Comet 67P is from deuterium. It's a heavier hydrogen than the kind in our own water. So that says at least no parts of that comet contributed to the water in the oceans on Earth. That was a sort of a disappointment.
Thanks for that answer. Oliver, your next question.
What is your favourite science fiction film and character?
What's my favorite science fiction film and character? Ooh, Simon. I actually love Sandra Bullock in Gravity because it may be science fiction, but it's very realistic in many respects. And I just fell in love with her and her character. I'm also a huge fan of the Star Wars, Star Trek. I like Lieutenant Uhura. I love Dr. Spock. So I've got a bunch of them. Yeah.
You can't. It has to be Star Trek or Star Wars. You have to choose one.
I have to choose one or the other. I think I actually like Star Trek better than Star Wars, and the reason was probably because in Star Trek we don't talk as much about war and combat and conflict and everything, I think.
You guys, Star Trek. Show of hands for Star Trek. None.
None?
Show of hands for Star Wars.
Why? Why?
Comprehensively outvoted. Why do you prefer Star Wars? Anyone? Carmen.
Oh, okay, I got you.
You can't really argue with the lightsaber, can you?
I can't argue with the lightsaber.
Carmen, it's your question next as well. What would you like to ask?
What three records would you take into space and why?
Oh, like record albums or
Yeah.
CDs or stuff? I would probably take Handel's Messiah. I love it, every bit of it. All the different seasons, Christmas, Easter, everything. It tells the story of the Bible that I study. I would probably take a really good gospel album. Oh man, something done by the Staple Singers maybe, or something like that. And then I'd take a Sarah Brightman album. And you don't ask me which one, I don't know. I'm just in love with her and everything she sings. I'd probably take one that's got a lot of highlights from Andrew Lloyd Webber, that has some of her songs from Phantom and a lot of other things. And maybe if not that, I'd take an album that's got the duets of Sarah Brightman and Andrea Bocelli. So.
Do you, when you're strapped in on
and
the
we
shuttle?
take those on our flights, by the way. You're allowed to take. Back when I flew, we didn't have CDs, so we took little cassette tape recordings. Nowadays, they can take CDs or they take their iPhones, and they can upload music all the time, so they can change on the International Space
So you
Station.
can get sort of Spotify beamed up or any other streaming
yeah,
service.
they can do whatever they
Amazing.
want.
They've got it easy now, haven't they? Really?
Not easy. It's soft.
Yeah. So our next question is Shania. Your second question.
What do you think needs to be done to involve more women
in the NASA workforce?
Oh, what do we need to do to involve more women in the NASA workforce? My chief scientist, Dr. Ellen Stofan, was here in the museum not long ago. We need to have more women like Dr. Stofan, or like my deputy, Dr. Dava Newman, who is an incredible engineer, was a professor at MIT until she came to be my deputy almost 3 weeks ago. Or we need to have more women like the incredible astronauts in the space program today, Jeanette Epps, or like Mae Jemison, or the late Sally Ride, or the late Judy Resnick. We need to build them up as heroes. Not a woman, but here in the UK, you all need to know who Tim Peake is, because Tim Peake is a real life, no stuff, modern day, contemporary astronaut who's going to go and live and work on the International Space Station by the end of this year. And so you'll have your own UK astronaut as a role model and an example. And hopefully Tim will come back and inspire you to want to be an astronaut, or some of the other young ladies. And you'll have women who follow Tim Peake to become the UK's 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 20th astronauts.
Do you guys want to be astronauts, the young women on the panel? Yeah? You want to go to space? Yes, good. That's great. And time for our last question. Sadly, we're running out of time, but it's from Rosie at the end there. Rosie.
Does our future lie in other planets? I'm 13, so would I ever experience space travel?
Rosie, our future does lie on other planets, immediately on Mars, you know, because like I said, in your lifetime, we're going to put humans on Mars. In the process of going there, working with other nations, a lot of them want to go to the moon, because up until now, only the United States has ever put anybody on the moon. So in the process of, remember I told you we're going to live and work for about 10 years in lunar orbit, what we call cislunar space. And we have a phrase for it at NASA. We call it the proving ground. We're going to continue to develop the technologies needed to go to Mars. We're going to continue to understand more and more about the human body and how it reacts in a microgravity environment. We're going to go back to the surface of Mars because it's less than 1 gravity. So its gravity is less than Earth. And we will learn some things there that will help us when we get to Mars, whose gravity is also less than Earth's. So there's going to be, I think the future for all of you and me is going to involve life on other planets.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much for those questions. Just one last thing while we've got some children here. Yeah. But I mean, what message would you give to children in the future?
My message to you all is very, very simple, and it's the way I start out every presentation. No matter what you want to do in life, 3 things you need to do. You need to study really hard. And people ask, what should I study if I want to be an astronaut? Always, 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 no matter what you want to be, study as much math and science as you can, because that opens your world to whatever you want to do. Even if you think you want to be a singer, or you want to be a songwriter, or you want to be an accountant, still learn as much math and science as you can, because it means if you later decide you want to be an engineer or a scientist, you've got that background. Second thing is work really hard. And by that, I mean just practice, focus when you're in the classroom, pay attention to what your teachers are doing, and perhaps the most important piece of advice would be never, ever, ever be afraid of failure. Don't be shy about trying something because you feel you're not going to be picked. Somebody's going to complain about your being there. You may be in danger. If you study really hard and you weigh the risks, you can take measures to keep yourself, you know, relatively well out of danger. So I would say just don't be afraid of failure. That's the most important thing.
Get out there. Well, big round of applause, please, for Mr. Charles Boden. Thank you to the panel as well. Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was great. It's great being on your hot seat.